Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. It is always nice to see so many people at our meetings. And I am not sure if you need much of an introduction when it comes to Dennis. He's been around forever, okay, and he's got a finger in all the pies in the Genealogy Society. But it's a great privilege to have you here today, Dennis. And we are looking forward to your presentation on adoptions. Baie dankie.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be with the eGGSA on a Zoom meeting. It's always interesting to listen to meetings that are arranged on Zoom. And it opened a totally new perspective and an avenue of sharing information. You lose the personal contact. You don't have a cup of coffee with each other after a meeting, but you get the time to share information worldwide. And Alta, thank you for your invitation. I'm going to talk to you about the state of adoption and the history of adoption in South Africa. And I just want to share something with you that we can read this to understand the context within what I'm going to explain to you. So I will share my screen. I'll just read through that. In 1899, in the case of Rob versus Neely, the executive of the court pointed out that there is no machinery for adoption in Cape law. In other words, up to 1900, there was no such thing as an official adoption. And we need to understand that when we do South African genealogy. And then he continues, and that the law of this colony does not recognize adoption as a means of creating the legal relationship of parent and child. Adoption, for the first time legally regulated in South Africa when the Adoption of Children's Act 25 of 1923 came into effect. The absence of such an institution in the early history of South Africa may be explained by the fact that formal adoption did not exist in Roman Dutch law. As we know, when the colony was started, in 1652, it was subject to Roman Dutch law because it was a Dutch colony. And in this article, and it's in a book written by Sandra Ferreira, Adoption in South Africa. And if you ever need to find references, you need to get hold of that book. But I'll treat the information that she has in there quickly. So it's clear that many children were born out of wedlock and taken by parents, mom and dad of the mother, took custody of the child, and it was hidden from everybody else. Prior to 1899, that happened very often, and obviously after that as well. But you will find many people that were adopted, in inverted commas, but not legally. Mother agreed to accept her daughter's child, and for practical purposes, it became their child. You will often see that in the list of births in Bibles where that information was recorded. Legally, there was no effect on the child that was born. The child did not become a child in that marriage. If the child was not mentioned in a will, it will not be able to claim anything from the will of the adopted parents, unless the adopted parents included that child in their will. That child did not exist as a unit in that family at all. And that we need to consider when we look at estate files and wills. Unless the child is specifically mentioned in the will, you will often find that a child is mentioned in a death notice. But that did not entitle the child to any benefits from the will. And often it resulted in family wars almost about farm properties that were registered and owned by a couple who adopted a child illegally and that child would then not benefit from the estate. In 1923, that was the first law that was promulgated in South Africa. It was the second of any country in the world that had a law on adoption, a regulated adoption. The first country that ventured in that direction was, in fact, New Zealand. And South Africa's law of 1923 was based on the law as promulgated in New Zealand. It then became legal to adopt a child, and a registrar was appointed in the now Department of Social Development, where all legal adoptions were registered. It was also legislated that that information was only available to the child and not to the parents or the children of the child. So if you have somebody that is looking for adoptive parents, that person would qualify to get information out of the registrar's files. Any child that is aware that he or she was adopted is fully entitled to go to the Registrar of Adoptions in Pretoria and ask for the file, and they cannot refuse information to that person. The file will contain an assessment by the social personnel in the Social Services Department, social workers, that assess the family, both on the biological side as well as the adoptive parents. They would assess that family and give a record of that to the magistrate's court, and he will issue an order, and that order will either say the child, the parents of the child, the biological parents may be made known, or it will give an order in the adoption order that the parents, the biological parents, has no right to know the name of the adoptive parents. In most cases that applies, because the adoptive family preferred not to make contact with the biological parents. So in terms of the law, if you are the mother of an adopted child, you will not be able to access those records. The Registrar of Adoptions will appoint a social worker to assist you, but you may receive copies of all the documents in that file. But you need to apply for that in person or appoint somebody to do that as a legal representative for yourself. You need to sign a document that authorizes that person, and then that person could go to the Registrar of Adoptions and get the file. They will interview you and find out why you want it, but they cannot refuse the information made available to the adopted child. And it is only the adopted child that has access. If you have a grandfather that you assume was adopted, you will not be able to access that information unless there is a medical reason for that. But then they will only provide you with the appropriate information. Let's use an example. Somebody suffers from a rare disease and would like to make sure that that disease is not transferable to her child when a mother becomes pregnant. And she would want to know the medical history of her biological parents if she knows that she's adopted. She will be able to get information, but not anybody further down the line. So you need to be a direct blood relation in the first degree of the person before you can get information. It is very difficult to communicate with that department because almost like home affairs, they don't respond to documentation. They don't respond to letters. You really have to be very persistent. And I have in the past often had to make use of the Promotion of Access to Information Act, which places a responsibility on the information officer, and in this case it's the Registrar of Adoptions, that must respond to a request within 30 days. If he or she does not respond to that request within 30 days, either refusing access and giving reasons or giving access, it must be done within 30 days. So those are the options that are left to somebody that suspects or knows that he or she is an adopted child, to get information from that. We are often confronted as genealogists by people that want to obtain information about their adopted or their birth biological parents. And we must really tread very carefully with something like that. Ideally, one would need a social worker, somebody that is experienced in this. And let me give you a few examples of how I became involved in doing adoption research. I had a call from a lady in Australia. Her husband was born in South Africa. He was adopted. He subsequently married the lady in South Africa and they moved to Australia. And they had a very good married life up to mid-term, when people start worrying about their ancestors. The husband tried to work through the fact that he was adopted. He knew he was adopted, but he never knew who the parents were. And he lost interest in his family, he lost interest in his business. The business almost went bankrupt. And she phoned me that morning and said, please, can I help? I can't recall where she got my name from. At this stage, I just had very basic information about adoptions. But I said, let me try, let me see if I can help you. I couldn't find any records anywhere. And I eventually placed an advert in the Natal Mercury, giving the date of birth of the child. And I said, anybody that lived in Natal on that specific date, the birth date of the child, please contact me. I didn't mention what it was about, anything like that. And 3 months later, early in the morning, I had a phone call. The guy said, are you perhaps looking for, let's call her Jill. Are you looking for Jill? I said, I don't know who I'm looking for. I'm trying to find the biological parent of somebody that was born on that date. He says, I have a friend, and I'll speak to the friend and I'll ask her to give you a ring. 2 days later, again, very early in the morning, I was still half asleep. I had a phone call and Jill's on the phone. I said, good morning, can I help you? She says, yes, are you my son? I said, no. It was such an emotional thing for both her and myself. I'd never dealt with something like this before. I'd never really got involved in the social aspects of adoptions. And we started talking. I said, yes, I have contact with somebody that says he was adopted on that and that date. And it turned out that she had the baby. The parents, she was at university then. The father was at a college in Pietermaritzburg. And like everything else, when you're at university, you get involved in relationships. And they went a bit too far that one day, and it resulted in a pregnancy. And the parents on both sides said, you do not marry, you do not take the child, you adopt the child. It was a very Peter Maritzburg type family. And they forced them to give the child up for adoption. And then subsequently, after they both qualified, they got married. So now you have the mother and father of the adopted child, which you don't often find. You very rarely get the name of the father. She said, but I have a problem. I have 3 children, and they don't know that they have an older brother. We're going to have a family reunion and talk about this. And 3 or 4 days later, she phoned me. She says, it was quite a shock when my eldest son suddenly realized he was in fact not my eldest son. But they worked through this and they accepted that. And then I set up a meeting with the 3 of them, 2 parents and the son, and they eventually met. She got a ticket, flew over to Australia, and it was a very pleasant experience. They all were very happy. There were no third parties involved in the birth. They created the child and they married, and they always longed to find out where the child was, but they didn't have access to the information to do that. So that was the first experience I had, and it was really a very emotional experience for all of us. I often still get tears in my eyes when I talk about that family. I speak to them occasionally, they're very happy. And that started off my interest in adoptions. And because of the success that I had, I started getting more and more people. But regrettably, it's not often that you end up with such a pleasant outcome. That was Jack and Jill. But let me tell you about Sarel and Sophie. Sarel and Sophie were the mothers of a child that was born out of wedlock. They weren't then married. They gave the child up for adoption. The child ended up in the eastern part of Natal. And then she developed the need to actually find out who her mother was. She developed cancer. She was in a very severe state of health, and she wanted to make contact with her mother. I eventually found the mother. I was lucky enough that she knew the first names, and it was very unusual first names. So I went through the then 84 voters roll to find somebody with those names. At that stage, the voters roll was only available in fish form, and to find that name, there was no index. You just had to pray that you get that unusual name. And I eventually found the unusual name. And that was the start of my quest to get the 1984 voters roll indexed, because it makes so much information available on the female side of our genealogy, because you now can get the maiden surname. You can do searches on the maiden surname. And anyway, I then got hold of the mother. I spoke to the mother. The mother had married a person, and that person didn't know that the mother had a child out of wedlock. It was never mentioned. She was in a comfort zone. She was so afraid that if the husband got to know of this, he would leave her. And she didn't really have something to fall back on. But she really wanted to see the child. 3-4 years after that, she phoned me again. I didn't, in the meantime, told the daughter that I found the mother, but she cannot make contact. 3-4 years later, the mother decided, well, come hell or high water, I want to meet my child. So I got each of them to make up a photo album and to write a letter, each one to the other, because they were both very concerned about what they would find. And that's often the problem. You don't know what lifestyle the mother has, father has, the child has, and you would often find yourself in a position that you had to take that into account. But they sent me the photographs, I sent it on to the respective parties, they looked at them, and then we set up a family meeting in a church in Pretoria. And they arrived there with a convoy of vehicles. The whole family was there, because on both sides, they now wanted to see these people that we've spoken about, that we've seen in pictures, that we've read about. We now want to see them. So we set up my daughter in one room with the mother. I was in the other room with the daughter, and we prepared them for the meeting. And I wish I could explain to you the pleasure that I had in seeing them meeting each other for the first time. And it was the daughter recovered. She's still alive today, and that's now about 10 years later. The father, or the husband of the mother, accepted the child. So it was a happy ending all round. The third one I want to talk to you about is somebody that was born out of wedlock in Florida, in Transvaal, given up for adoption, ended up in England. He got very sick. He is still terminally ill today. And we had the information, we got information from the Register of Adoptions. And eventually I found the mother still living in Florida, but married very happily to an advocate. And she just couldn't get to the stage that she would accept the fact, or accept the fact that she must tell her husband about this. And she passed away eventually, knowing that the child wanted to meet her, but that she was not able to meet him. So much so that she didn't even want to send a letter to him to say, son, this is the circumstances, this is what happened. I'm sorry, but I can't make contact with you. And he is still alive in London. I still correspond with him. The mother has passed away. The husband of the mother doesn't know about it and will never know. And that's what one must respect. If you ever take on a case of somebody that is looking for adoptive parents, that if you find that person, you must protect that person at all costs. If that person is not able to communicate with the child for whatever reason, you must respect the right of that person. I've had a number of cases where I found the biological mother, but unfortunately, in this one specific case, she passed away 6-7 years ago. But at least the person could go to Sasolburg in Vaal area, iemand is van die Vaal. She could go to the grave and get closure and learn all about the mother. And that gives closure to the child. They often still don't know what the circumstances were that led to the adoption. But at least they can get closure and know my mother was Susan Venter, and she married a van der Merwe, and she passed away, and I have 3 half-brothers or whatever. The main message that I have is that one should be so careful about how you approach this, because you could upset the family life of the biological mother, because you mostly deal with the biological mother. Very few occasions you find the biological father as well, because the mother refuses to tell, and the father refuses to accept. And you cannot prove unless you do now genetic analysis. The current state of legislation in South Africa is the Children's Act, Act 38 of 2005. And that regulates adoptions in South Africa now. It's a very detailed act. It has regulations, many regulations attached to it. But essentially what it does, it gives a right to an adopted child, where the parents, the biological parents, are replaced by the adoptive parents. And they are, in fact, in terms of the act, they are now the parents. The act then does not further refer to them as the adoptive parents. They are the legal parents, and the children are not excluded from any rights that a normal biological child would have. So if you have 4 children in a family and there's 1 adopted child, that child has all the rights of the other children, as if it is the biological. And as I said, the act actually states that it is the new parents of that child. The rights of the biological parents no longer exist. They have no, unless the magistrate rules differently. But in almost each case, it is a total adoption that excludes the rights of the biological parents, and the mother often signs it away. The father does not, and there's been legislation about that, the rights of the biological father, where he or she did not marry the biological mother. And again, the same lady, Sandra Ferreira, wrote on that about the rights of biological fathers. And that is legislation in almost in work in progress. We know of some of the cases that fathers have gone to court to get the right of access to his child, although he was never married to the mother. And the court has granted those rights to the parent on certain conditions. So let me, I think I'm just about on time for 25 minutes, Alta. Your main contact with adoptions is the Registrar of Adoptions in Pretoria. That's where you need to go. And when you are the adopted child, or the adopted child contacts you to assist, that child does have the right to access to information. Not you, but the child has. And the registrar cannot refuse you that access. Good luck. Remember that it's an emotional experience. It becomes very emotional because you are dealing with the life of 3 people: the mother, the father, and the child on the biological side, but also the mother and the father adoptive, you could spoil the life of any one of the 5 people if you are not sensitive to the effects of adoption and the legalities of adoption. Tread carefully when you do any adoption research. Alta, that's me, done. Questions. I'm quite happy to take any questions.
I've got a question for you. It's somewhat different. I've got a cousin, okay, so she died about 7 years ago, that was adopted. And for some odd reason, before she died, she gave me her adoption papers. So I know her original surname and her original name and all that kind of stuff. Now, from a genealogy point of view, where do you place that person? Because I know her surname originally was Olofse. So now I'm thinking, if you do a tree, so she's Venter, and you can put her on the Venter tree, on my Venter tree, that is. But now the Olofse family also do research on their stuff. Do you share that with them? Do you give it to them? Because I've got it. She's met, by the way, she's met her biological parents while she was still alive, obviously. And she doesn't want to know anything about them. But I was thinking, somewhere in the Olofse tree, if I can put it like that, these people will pop up, her parents, her biological parents. And I don't know whether her name will ever be there as a registered baby. But if it is, she's just going to disappear and be a nobody. And I don't know that that's right. What do you think?
So there are 2 issues. The one issue is the Protection of Personal Information Act. If you are aware, and if she was still alive and she could tell you, yes, you may share it, you can do so. But you need to be very concerned about the privacy issues of the other part of her family. In terms of your own tree on legacy or family search or whatever program you use, you would show both the parents. You'll have the biological parents, and then you just add adoptive parents. So she would be in your database, she would be linked to both sets of families. You said Venter and Olofse, I think. She would be linked to both those families. She will have 2 sets of parents. But the issue is not how you handle it in your own information. The issue is how you handle that in terms of providing that to the Olofse researchers. She is now passed on. So her information now becomes publishable, because you can publish information of people that have already passed on. But she might have brothers and sisters in that Olofse family that are not aware of it. And that's why I say tread very carefully when you use your database to provide to the Olofse family. Just make sure that you now know her, you know her parents' names, but does her brothers and sisters, if they are still alive, know about her? And that's where you need to be careful.
Yeah, you see, unfortunately, I can't ask her that. I know she met the family. I think she met some of her brothers or sisters at the time. My question is, I understand what you're saying. I'm just thinking, if I go search something like, let's say, family search on her biological parents' names, and I find her brothers and sisters there, the names, would one link them or note them somewhere, or do you just ignore it? I mean, my point is probably this: she was a very nice person. And we're all old people now, but it would be a pity for a person just to disappear from a tree or from a family. Just one day they stay and gone.
I would answer you in this way. you said she met her brothers and sisters. If she met her brothers and sisters, they obviously know that they are related, that they are brothers and sisters to her. And then you can put it in the family tree with their consent. Just say to them, you're going to add their name. Just declare that to them and ask them for their approval for you to publish that in a family tree. That would be the way to do that, because you did say that she had met them, so they were aware of her existence and of the fact that they were family members, siblings.
Goeienaand almal. Ek wil graag weet, ek is op soek na my man se familie. Ek het nou, ons het sy DNA ook laat doen en ek het soort van met verlangse familie op 'n familie, moontlike familie vir hom afgekom. Moet mens dan nog maar steeds sosiale werker gebruik om kontak te maak met die familie as mens bevestiging soek, of moet mens maar eerder deur die registrateur gaan en kyk of mens daar kan regkom?
Ja, as jy inligting het, bewyse van inligting het dat iemand aangeneem is, en veral as die biologiese ma al reeds oorlede is, maak kontak, maar doen dit net omsigtig. Want al wat jy by die registrateur gaan kry is bewys van die inligting wat jy reeds het. Ekskuus dat ek net hierdie foon afsit, net 'n oomblik. 'n Mens moet net versigtig wees. You must be very careful of how you handle information about adoptions, not to embarrass people involved, because there are people that would not want you to make the information public. And that would be a violation of the Poppy Act. And there are no action has been taken against anybody in terms of the Poppy Act yet. And I would think that there are going to be a number of tests that will go to the Supreme Court about the Poppy Act, because it's too broad, it's too wide. It takes away rights of people like publishers, like artists, like journalists, and there are certain exemptions for journalism. So one would have to tread very carefully with the Poppy Act until such time that it's been tested, and it will happen soon, that people are going to have to test it when information is made public by others.
I got a really strange request from somebody looking for their biological mother. And I had a quick look and found her not her birth certificate, her baptism certificate. And I nearly fell over backwards because the mother and father I had encountered in some research I'd done for somebody else. And it turned out I knew her grandmother, was somebody that I actually visited. It was the most, so therefore, you know, a cousin in the UK was the guy that I found, whose family I found originally. And this was worked out as a whole long, it's a mess, because it's suspected that the adoption was never formalized, that it was agreement between Granny and the mother of the biological father, that this baby was handed over to the couple who weren't able to have children, but this was back in 1944. And I'm wondering if it's worth approaching the Registrar of Adoptions to see if there's anything there, or whether that's just a sort of dead end. She's busy applying for a vault copy of her birth certificate. I don't know what you think there.
Okay, let me explain what you get today if you apply for a vault copy. you will get an amended vault copy of your birth certificate if it's a legal adoption. In other words, you will have 2 vault copy birth certificates. One in the name of your biological parents, and the minute you are adopted, that certificate is withdrawn and is marked with a big red cross, but it remains on the file, and a new one is issued with the dates, similar dates, but with new parents. It will not say biological or otherwise.
All right.
If you apply for a full vault copy, you will get the newer one.
Yes.
If you suspect that that person was adopted, you can go to the Home Affairs and use the of Access to Information Act that allows you access to your own original first version birth certificate.
Okay.
So that's the answer there. What I did not talk about is the issue that you raised of baptismal certificates. Because very often you will find a child baptized by the mother or the mother and the father in church records. They are not destroyed, so they remain there.
Yeah.
You will have the civil registration with the Department of Home Affairs. That certificate, your birth certificate, will be altered and replaced with a new one. But that's a second avenue of searching in addition to birth certificates, is the baptismal certificates, which you often find the biological mother baptizing or having the child baptized, either with or without a father, or with somebody else standing in for the father. So that is possible, that's an avenue. But you use the word, it's a mess. It really is a mess, because despite the fact that they had an act that applied itself to adoptions in South Africa since 1923, and a couple of years later in Great Britain as well, even up to today, there are many illegal adoptions. Many that people are they are registered, and that's why they now insist that the hospitals register the birth. Home Affairs will go to the hospital and register the birth there, so that you don't have illegal registrations. Because in that case, where a daughter or somebody has a child but does not want to live with a child and doesn't want to adopt it legally, they will go to Home Affairs and register it in the name of the uncle and aunt, or mother and father of the pregnant girl. And it's still a mess. Adoption, despite the law, despite the Act of 2005, it's still, especially in the Black and the colored communities, there are a lot of people that are not registered correctly, and they're adopted unofficially.
First off, I'm in Melbourne, Australia, so it's very difficult to get hold of any of the officers, whether it's Home Affairs or the registrar. We're actually, my wife is trying to find a sister who was put up for adoption when she was born. So that would be 50 odd years ago. Now, we did write to the registrar, and we've never received any replies. I knew that they wouldn't disclose information, but all I was asking them was if they had a record of my wife's sister trying to find her family, and if that was the case, if they could sort of try to put us in touch with one another. And I knew it would depend on whether she was actually trying to find her family. dealing with them, I don't get any replies. It's been 5 years, well, 4 or 5 years, just nothing. So if we wanted to continue with that, is it worth trying to find someone like yourself or others who could perhaps help us and try to find the information? I have some information that the Facebook page called Waarden die Wêreld. One of the admins there did manage to find some information for me, but obviously I don't know how accurate that is. And I was just wondering, should we be looking at using someone like yourself to try and find some more information for us?
Yes, what I would suggest you do is go through the 1984 voters roll, or look at the web shop, GSSA's web shop, and search the 1984 voters roll, because you say it's 50 years ago, so you back to about 1960, no, 1970. If it was the middle of the 60s, do you know what year she was born or suspected born?
I believe I know the day and the month. It's in January, and it was either 1964 or 65. So I'm not sure which of those 2 years it was.
Okay, do a search of that birth date on the web shop in the 1984 voters rolls and see if there is something that pops up there that helps you. If you battle with that, come back to me, let me know. I'll try and help. But we would have to put some screws on the Register of Adoptions, because that, in the final analysis, would give the answer to that. Because they can search by parents and by child. So if you have the parents' names,
I've got all of that. I sent all that to them, but they just totally ignored it.
Yeah, no, they are very useless. I'm busy with the matter now with them, that I've now referred to the President's office. Whether I will have success, because they are so independent and useless, they just don't answer correspondence. But let's give it a try. Try the 84 voters roll, see if something pops up on that birth date in the 60s, because you can search by birth year.
Okay.
Try that.
Okay, I'll try that. I'll also, I've been using that South African site Gen database, so I may try looking on there as well.
Sort of an observation, don't you think, I don't know whether this forum can answer it, but don't you think it is a child's right to know that they've been adopted? There's two things about that that comes to mind. So in my family, there's quite a number of people that have been adopted. I just mentioned earlier about my cousin who passed away, but on the other side, I've got also a cousin. He only found out that he was adopted very late in life. And what he did is he you know, we never see these children different from our own family. They are family. But when he found out that he was adopted, he broke off all contact with us. He doesn't want to know anything about any family on our side. Nix. That's the one observation. The other one is, so I think a child should know that they're adopted. I don't know when or what age, but I think that is right. Then there was a case in the US that I found very interesting at the time, where two people married, and then there was some medical thing from their children, from the first child, and they got tested, and they found out that they were brother and sister. So, so all I'm saying is, somewhere, either when you want to get married, so you don't have to know necessarily that you have been adopted, but somewhere there must be, or there should be, some sort of database and saying, the two of you can't get married for whatever reason. I don't know. This is a complicated thing, as Dennis said. Anyway, that's my thing for today. I gaan nie verder praat.
Chris, you are quite right. any person has the right to know information that is important to him. The two acts, the provision of Paya and Poppy, make provision for the rights of people to information. And a child has that right. If you think that you were possibly adopted, you have the right to go to the department, to the registrar of adoptions, and ask them whether you are adopted. And they have to respond. They will probably say, we have no record of an adoption for you. They will obviously not have information of adoptions that were not registered with them, that were done illegally. But yes, you are quite right. They have a right to know. I believe that the child should be told as early as possible, because then they have the ability, Afrikaanse woorde sal wees, om dit te verwerk. To work through that at a very early age, so that when you get to school, you're adopted, you know, you're an adopted child, so what? You have the same right as your brother and sister. And then to allow that child to interrogate the adoption when he gets to the stage that he wishes to do that. Very many people know that they're adopted, but they do not wish to know from where and by who the biological parents were. And many of the children just say, well, why would I want to know who my parents were when I have parents that have looked after me and cared for me better than I could wish for? But then somebody else might say, I need to know whether there are problems, medical history in my family, so that when I get married, I don't marry my second cousin once removed or whatever. So it's a vexing problem. Yes, the very simple answer is every child has the right to know all information about his ancestry. He has that right. So he can go to the department, he or she can go to the Register of Adoptions, and they cannot refuse to help him. But the parents should be coached to ensure that the children are made aware of it at a relatively early age. That's my view. Some people differ, but my view is they should know.
Dennis, thank you for your presentation. I found it most interesting. Unfortunately, my necessity to understand adoptions comes in the 1890s. Do you have any experience with adoptions in those days?
Obviously not experienced directly, because those people are
very dead.
Almost always did not do it legally. Very often you would find baptismal records that will help you to determine actual parenthood. If you find the adoption records of that person. But there was no official registration of births. There was no adoption legislation, not in Roman Dutch or in the British legal system. So there was no need to register. The only place you would find information that would maybe help you is in the actual church records.
I have a situation where a baby was handed over to Izili Convent with no parentage, but at a much later date, somebody actually wrote on the baptism certificate that this child had indeed on this date married a certain person in Johannesburg at the cathedral. Now, the name of the child on the baptism certificate and the name of the woman who got married on that day at the cathedral are totally different. And I've been trying to work out how her name would have changed. And my assumption, one of my assumptions has been that she was retrieved from Izili Convent by her biological mother. And they then moved to KwaZulu-Natal, where she attended a Catholic school. And I'm wondering if it was possible at that time, because up until 1895, there were no birth certificates either. So your baptism certificate was your identity document, so to speak. And I just wondered if it is possible that she could have been rebaptized and given a new name, because I cannot come up with any other way she would have been given a name and then got married 14, 15 years later with another name. And my request to the archives to try and sort out the baptism certificate, to find out who would have the authority to write on their records this information about her marriage, really has come to nothing.
I'm afraid that is a problem. You would often find in the registers of the home where she was cared for.
Okay.
See if there are in that church records of movement of people in and out, both in terms of staff and people that were left there for adoption. I would go that route and search their registers of people, because they keep a very good record in the convents and the Catholic Church of things like that. You will not find anything in registration certificates, civil registration, that will help you.
Thank you.
So
I'll do
your
that.
answer would be in the church.
Dan Dennis, van my kant af, thank you so much for giving up your Saturday afternoon. It is very interesting. Okay. I think it is also a case that is very close to the heart, but I think most of us have got somebody who's been adopted in or out of the family, and there's many questions about them. Baie dankie julle almal vir jou teenwoordigheid.